It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. I feel like it's been a minute since we've done Herd Mentality, so I'm excited to get caught up with all of the outstanding questions that have been sent in. Let's dive into it. The first one comes from PJ. PJ says, now that we have plugged some of the holes with free agent pickups, where do you think we should focus on more in the draft? Love this question because obviously free agency does dictate the NFL draft landscape. And I think for every team, their objective is, and especially for Branon Beane, because he's done this throughout the years, is to get their roster as much set as possible prior to the draft to allow yourself maximum freedom to select the best player available. The last thing you want to do is go into a draft feeling like you have to get your starter at a particular position. You have to find your starting right guard or your starting defensive tackle or starting safety. The last thing you want to do is go into a draft feeling like you have to do that, because that's how you make mistakes. That's how you force needs. That's how you overlook better players at other positions. And so first things first, I am not married to any one position. I am not wide receiver or bust in the first round. I am not defensive tackle or bust in the first round. Now, there's certain areas of this football team that I want to see addressed, but the last thing you can do is go into a draft feeling like you have to get a particular thing. And I know that's not what PJ asked, but that's kind of where I want to take my answer. Now, with that all out of the way, there are positions of concern to me, and I think all of these positions are very much in play early in the draft. First of all, interior defensive line. The Bills have literally nothing beyond Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I'm greatly concerned about that. I want more impact. I want more depth. Yeah, interior defensive line's big. Interior offensive line. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, but you have Connor McGovern flipping over to center. You have David Edwards stepping in, presumably at left guard. I think you should be thinking about that. And these guards are getting expensive. You saw a $100 million guard, Robert Hunt, go to the Carolina Panthers. What if Osiris Torrence continues to develop? Is he going to be a $22 million a year guard? You hope so. But the point being is that these positions are just getting more and more expensive. It's nice to have some young, meaningful talent in the pipeline. Wide receiver, firmly in play for me. Of course, getting ahead of whatever the future holds for Stefon Diggs, but also adding more firepower to this offense. Yeah, I want that. Edge rusher. What do the Bills have a true sack artist right now at off the edge? I love Gregory Rousseau. I think he's every bit of a quality starter, but I don't know that he's this premier NFL pass rusher. He's an outstanding player, but is he the guy that's going to show up in every big moment to create that pressure? I think he's an outstanding starter. Is he elite? No, I don't think so in terms of pass rush. What can you count on from Von Miller? I like AJ Epinesa, but he's more of a defensive end 3. So yeah, if the Bills can find an impact edge rusher, I'd be all for that. Not to mention safety, where I think there's a high floor with Taylor Rapp and Mike Edwards. But Mike Edwards only a 1-year deal. Taylor Rapp, the Bills can get out of that contract after their 1 year. Safety's been an important position for this defense. And I think you're looking to find some impact there. So To me, those are the primary positions of focus for me. I think you could probably even talk about offensive tackle, Spencer Brown entering the last year of his deal. There's just a lot that can be in the mix for the Bills. I think pretty much just not tight end, not quarterback, probably not cornerback, and probably not running back in terms of your very early selections. So I think there's a lot in play, and really what it comes down to is value, who's on the board when the Bills pick. That's what's going to dictate these decisions, but I think there's a lot of flexibility for what Branon Beane can get done at the end of April. Chris says, you've talked some on the pod about the planned move of Connor McGovern to center and David Edwards taking over as the left guard. My question for you is, now that you've had some time to think about it, what do you see as some of the biggest potential positive outcomes and negative outcomes of making this change on the Bills' offensive line? That's a great question. I think if I'm trying to find the positives, I think, first of all, you get younger at center. You're 5 years younger with Connor McGovern compared to Mitch Morse. So that's good. And the center is an important part of your offensive line. They're very active in the protection calls. I think the chemistry with not only the offensive line, but the quarterback matters a lot there. So it's nice to get younger and feel like you have your center to go with Josh Allen for a long time. I also would say, for as much as I loved what the Bills' offensive line did last year, I thought the worst part of it was Mitch Morse and Connor McGovern playing next to each other in the run game. Neither one of them are overly powerful. And when you have two non-people movers next to each other, you saw some issues. And not only with creating movement, but just communication and timing stuff between Morse and McGovern. I don't think that chemistry was very sound. So I think that's helpful. And I think David Edwards is probably the most physical, powerful one of those three. So it's nice to feel like you get a little bit more powerful on the interior of your offensive line. Now, negatives, I think there's plenty here. First and foremost, I think he got worse. Mitch Morse and Connor McGovern is a better center left guard combination than Connor McGovern and David Edwards. And not to mention, the depth is not as strong because Ryan Bates has been traded away and now David Edwards is looked at as a starting left guard. The other negatives, it's completely unknown. Connor McGovern shifting to center. There's no proof of concept there in the NFL. So you'll see what that looks like. You've never seen David Edwards play left guard continuously between Dawkins and McGovern. So that all has to come together. I already mentioned that the offensive line depth is strong. And this is a big reason why I think we need to be giving more consideration to the offensive line for an early pick. This is a really strong offensive line class. And I like David Edwards. I've said in the past on this podcast, really for the last 2 years, that I feel like David Edwards is a starting caliber guard in the NFL. But he doesn't stop me from drafting a guy that I think has a first-round grade that I think could be an impact starter for a long time and be a pillar piece for this unit. He does not stop me from that in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to think about with this offensive line, especially because it was so good last year. You felt like it was a clear strength of the football team, certainly the best Josh Allen's had yet. And then the Bills make this choice to kind of blow up the middle of it. And they didn't have to. They did not have to. They made a choice. Let's hope they're right about it. All right, folks, in just a second, I'm going to talk about compensatory picks. We're going to talk about some other team-building philosophy, the defensive line rotation, so be sure to stick with me. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. How is your social battery right now? Are you drained, bursting with energy? What's the right amount of socializing for you? And how do you recharge? Maybe you thrive around people, or maybe you need to spend more time alone. Therapy can give you the self-awareness to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. Therapy is helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire. That'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, folks, welcome back. This next one comes from Kevin. Kevin says, why are compensatory picks such a mystery? Sometimes unsure if a team qualifies, not knowing what round a pick will be, etc., almost like a black box. It's a good question, Kevin, and a timely question, as not only we are licking our wounds from not getting the third round pick expected for Tremaine Edmunds, it winds up being a fourth, but also the Bills have a great opportunity with what's going on so far in free agency to get a compensatory pick in 2025, probably multiple. Right now, they're on track for 3. So that's all good. But what's the reality here? Why is this so confusing? Well, it's confusing because it's not decided right now. There's things beyond just signing the contracts that matter. So let's get into this a little bit. I'll try to do my best. It's a little bit complicated. You get a compensatory pick based on expired contracts in versus expired contracts out. And if you have a net loss, you're eligible for a compensatory pick. Now, how are they equated? First of all, size of contract is significant. You qualify to get a third round compensatory pick, which is the highest compensatory pick. They're handed out in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds. So you're eligible for a third round pick if you have an expired contract, an unrestricted free agent that signs with another team, that signs a deal that lands them in the top 5% of salaries in the NFL amongst all positions. So in order to get that third round pick, step one, that deal has to land the player in the top 5% of salaries. You're eligible in the 4th round if you're between 5 and 10 percentile of highest salaries. 5th round, 10 to 15% of highest salaries. 6th round, 15 to 25% of salaries. And 7th round, 25 to 35% of salaries. So that's step one. And then when you bring in a player, let's say that you lose a player to a salary that ranks them in between the top 5% and top 10%. So you get a 4th round compensatory pick. If you sign another player in that range, that's an unrestricted free agent, they cancel each other out. So it doesn't matter. You have to have that net loss. So that's step one. Step two is you have to be mindful of they only hand out 32 compensatory picks every year. So this is all fun. This is all great. But when you start to get to that 7th round bucket, 25 to 35% tile of salary, if there's more than 32 of those players, well, guys get bumped off the list. So there's only 32 available. Then from there, it does factor in performance, the percentage of snaps that a player signs. And then there's also consideration to all pro honors and the Pro Football Writers Association of America on-field awards. So performance matters. So you can feel one type of way right now, but if that guy goes and signs a deal with some other team and then they get injured or they don't meet a certain percentage of snap threshold, it's going to fall off. So it is a little bit fluid. You project these things and they look one way, and you certainly hope it goes that way, but it's not just one thing, and it's a fluid situation up until a certain point. So that's what you have to be mindful of with this compensatory pick formula. Aiden says, do you agree with the notion out there that teams, specifically the Bills in this case, should always pick offense in the 1st round of the draft no matter what and just figure it out on defense? I personally don't understand this and agree with it, because if you look at the league every year, defense and special teams are really what matters most come playoff time. Curious to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah, I don't buy into this even a little bit. I've kind of talked about this a few different times, but ignoring defense is just absolutely silly. It's absolutely silly. It's rooted in this idea that you got to put everything imaginable around that quarterback and outscore everybody and figure it out on defense and defense schmefense. That is so silly. That is not rooted in any sound logic, philosophy, proven team building history. None of it. It's just silly. It's fantasy football romanticization of how things are supposed to be. That's not how you win Super Bowls. It's not at all. There's literally zero proof of concept of that being a sustainable way to win Super Bowls, especially the team, the Kansas City Chiefs, that's won 3 of the last 5. They don't buy into this at all. They use an overwhelming amount of their draft picks on defensive players, especially the early picks. So people are just silly with this. And also, did you watch the playoffs last year? Did you watch the Chiefs? The Super Bowl and the AFC Championship game tell the story here. Over the last 10 games of the season, including the playoffs, Kansas City didn't score more than 27 points in any of those games. They won the AFC Championship game 17-10 over Baltimore. That was your AFC Championship game, 17-10. The Chiefs were 15th in scoring offense in the NFL, number 2 in scoring defense. The bottom line is this: you got to be good on both sides of the ball. You have to be able to win games in a variety of different ways. You can't just go into a game and, well, if it goes a certain way, then we can win. If we can outscore them, if we can invite them to a track meet and outscore them, we can win. You can't do it. You have to be able to win in a variety of ways. Tell me you don't know ball without telling me you don't know ball by saying that your first-round pick has to be an offensive player every single year and defense schmee-fence. All right? Ball knowers know that you got to be good on both sides of the ball. Harry says, I've been thinking recently with our lack of depth at the defensive line, what if Bobby Babich doesn't plan on rotating as heavily? We're not in a bad spot with our top 5 defensive linemen. Obviously needs to be addressed, but still, maybe we'll see starters play 75% of snaps. All right, I appreciate the question. I will push back because I don't think this will happen. I think Bobby Babich is going to be a defensive coordinator that believes in defensive line rotation. His number one influence in his coaching career is Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott believes in rotation, and honestly, most coordinators do. There's not a whole lot of teams that are out there that all of their starters play 75% of the snaps. There's a few guys in the league that play a lot of volume. Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, these guys play insane amount of snaps, but not everybody. It's like a couple of guys out there. I think Ed Oliver can be a 70% guy. I think he played 72% last year. I think Daquan Jones can be a 60% guy. It's kind of where he's been the last few years of his career. But even if that's true, even if Ed Oliver's a 70% guy at defensive tackle and Daquan Jones is a 60% guy at defensive tackle, you still have 70% of the snaps to fill behind them. And that doesn't even factor injuries. Like if one of them misses time, which happened. I mean, Daquan Jones missed a bunch of time last year. Ed Oliver missed that Patriots game. So not only do I think Bobby Babich is going to rotate, you are just not good enough with this defensive tackle situation beyond Oliver and Jones. I love that starting pair, but you better find some answers behind them because you have 70, to me, at least 70% of snaps that need to be filled at that defensive tackle position. At defensive end, I feel a little bit better about it, but Casey Tuhill does not stop me from investing more there. This belief that Von Miller is going to figure it out next year is not something I'm counting on. I'm not saying he won't, but counting on that after what we just watched, I like AJ Epinesa, but he's probably a defensive end 3. I love Greg Rousseau, but none of that stops me from adding to that defensive end position at all. Andy says, I'm old enough to remember when free agent visits were a thing. It was big stakes on where the visit started and if the team would let them out of the building. I remember being glued to the radio, the Buffalo Bills message boards, and football sites like PFT refreshing for any sign of life. I remember when big names like Mario Williams came to town and were wined and dined. It was a lot more fun and added a lot of drama to free agency, which one would think the NFL would like more of, rather where we've landed with announcements right when the clock hits the opening of the tampering period. Was it the legal tampering period that killed most visits? Did the COVID year assist in that shift too? Why aren't physical visits nearly as much of a thing anymore? Is it simply that money is king and the rest truly doesn't matter? I think it's a good question, Andy, and I think a lot of people think about this as well. I definitely remember that Mario Williams deal. That was crazy, right? Just waiting for that ESPN ticker to say the Bills signed Mario Williams. It was kind of crazy that he was there for as long as he was, and Jim Kelly's taking him out, talking about hunting and all that stuff. It was cool to watch. It's just not the world we live in anymore. I think that's what it's just a changing of the times. Think about it like this. I mean, people literally buy houses without ever visiting them. Like they're across the country and they will buy a house without visiting it. I think that these players are more and more willing to kind of think about this for a while. It's not like the legal tampering period starts, they're offered a deal and they take it. This stuff materializes well before that. It really starts at the combine, where there's a lot of conversations, right? A lot of the framework of this stuff happens at the combine. That's just something that absolutely happens every single year. And then I think there's so much of a connection between the league. It's all so well connected that you probably have an idea. If you're a free agent, you kind of have an idea of the landing spots. You've probably done your own research beforehand. You know somebody that played for this coach or that team, and you kind of put it all together, and you're ready to make those decisions, and it's very competitive. The money, the big money in free agency hits quick. You don't have time to wait. If you're going to wait, they're going to move on to somebody else because that's just the way it is. The times have changed. So I think that the players are kind of in this position where they have to make a big decision in a short amount of time or teams are going to move on. Especially those desperate teams early on. We talked about this, like the bad football teams like the Commanders and the Titans and the Panthers and the Raiders, the ones that want to make the big splashes in free agency. They got to do that's their Super Bowl, man. That's what they got to do. They got to keep their fans interested. They got to go suck up these players. And if you want that money, you better take it when it's given to you because they will move on. They want that splash. And so, some players still obviously do visits based on circumstances. As we get a little bit deeper into free agency, you can see guys are starting to visit more and more, right? They're kind of vetting it out. They probably didn't get the money they really wanted initially, so they got to go visit and figure it out. Maybe there's some medical concerns. Trey White's been going on some visits lately. I'm sure that any team that would want to sign Trey White would want to bring him in and, see where he's at and have their doctors take a look at him, all that type of stuff. So it is circumstantial. But I think at the end of the day, what this really comes down to, it's a changing of the times. And I think guys are really well connected, and a lot of the framework of this stuff happens well before that legal tampering period actually begins. All right, we got more to get to, so be sure to stick with me. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they tear down the nets. All right, folks, got some more to get to. The next one here comes from Ryan. Pretty interesting question. He says, if the league goes forward with adopting the XFL kickoff rule, what kind of personnel chess can you foresee happening? With the long sprint down the field removed from the equation, do you anticipate bigger blockers on the receiving team and block shedding, short tackling linebacker types on kick coverage? Yeah, Ryan, I think you're exactly right. This is far less, if they go with the XFL rule, it's way less of an open field play. And it's going to come down to physicality, your ability to shed and disengage off blocks, your ability to connect with moving targets that in a tighter area. I think that matters a lot. I think size is going to come into play even more on both sides of the equation. And I think you could see more tight ends, more offensive linemen, being part of this, right? That's kind of turning it into, in some ways, like a run play. So front seven guys, offensive linemen, right? Like tight ends, guys that aren't as familiar to playing these types of roles are going to get these opportunities. So I think your undersized corners and safeties and receivers and running backs might have a little bit more of an uphill climb. And your linebackers and safeties and offensive linemen and defensive ends that can run, tight ends, I think they're going to have more opportunity. So yeah, it's that there's definitely an evolution coming with that. Now, still, the punt side of that is still normal as we know it, but this thing evolves so much every year. I think this will have an impact on how teams roster players, particularly on the depth side of things and special teams contributors. Alex says, what do you think of this trade down scenario in the draft? We trade with Washington at 36. In exchange, we get pick number 100. And to even up the trade value, we swap one of our 6 for one of their 5ths. My thought process here is that a good wide receiver would likely still be available at 36, and we get our 3rd-round pick back. And in this scenario, we could still use our collection of 5th-round picks to move up in the 3rd or 4th round if we want. My first thought process here is I definitely like the idea of adding another top 100 pick. I'm very interested in that. But it's impossible for me to answer a question like this because who are the Bills trading away from? I love the idea of moving back, right? That all sounds great. But I got to know who I'm trading away from. And if there's a particular player there that I like, I'm not trading away from that guy. So, yes, love the idea of adding a top 100 pick, but also very dependent on what players are available when that decision has to be made. But, yeah, generally speaking, the idea of moving back and adding another top 100 pick is very, very appealing to me. Papa T says, I like younger prospects, but I feel and he said this could be completely wrong, that the learning curve is a little steeper for younger players. We noticed that with Tremaine Edmonds and Kyer Elam as examples. Tremaine figured it out, and hopefully Elam will too. But how do you reconcile the younger prospect versus trying to maximize the rookie deal? And perhaps it really doesn't matter, and it's all about the physical and emotional maturity of the player. We'd love your thoughts. I think this is a good question, and this is the type of stuff I find myself thinking about all the time. I think there's a lot of layers to it. And I do think it is more circumstantial, like it is case by case. You can be young and ready to contribute. You can be young and need more time. You can be old and ready to contribute. You can be older and need more time. Now, there's extremities within that, right? Like, who was that quarterback out of Oklahoma State? Brandon Weeden was 28 years old. You can't pick him in the first round if you're the Cleveland Browns, but they did that. So there's got to be some thresholds and some disqualifiers that you're just, I'm not doing that. But if you're older, are you closer to your physical ceiling? Like, what's your mental makeup like? I think there's so much that goes into it, both on the young side and the older side. And it really is case by case. And I think that has to be a big point of emphasis in your scouting process, is understanding where each player is at. And then from there, projecting the most likely outcome. And I think you should want to maximize the value in the rookie deal. And I thought it was really cool that Sean McDermott even talked about that at the NFL Scouting Combine, where, you need contributions from young players, and that does play into maximizing that rookie deal. And you can't wait until year 3, year 4 to get those contributions because you've lost a lot of time. And that really, I think, applies mostly to earlier picks. And I think that's something the Bills are very much experienced with Kyer Elam right now. I don't know that Kyer Elam has not lived up to his billing because he was younger, though. I think it was more what he was asked to do in college foiled against what he's asked to do in the NFL versus Christian Benford's better than you, right? I think it's that more than anything. Those things layered together as opposed to, Kyer Elam's just really young. So Tremaine Edmonds, he still was a rookie starter, but very different position that he was asked to play with the Bills compared to Virginia Tech. So maybe the cautionary tale is there. If you're going to pick a younger player, don't pick a younger player that's going to have a really different role for your team compared to what they were asked to do in college. So I didn't plan on getting to that part, but in answering the question, my mind led me there. I think if there's a common denominator between Tremaine Edmonds and Kyer Elam, it's because it really is what the Bills asked them to do compared to what they were asked to do in college was drastically different. And I think that's where your curve came from, as opposed to, they're just not as old. Good question there from Papa T to close things out. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that you will take the time to make sure that you rate, review, and share the podcast. Be sure that you are subscribed. We'll see what happens in the coming days. If the Bills sign a player, I'll get to work on that right away, get into the film, and get a podcast out for you. Otherwise, we'll catch up with you again on Sunday. So thanks for being here. Hope you enjoyed. Go Bills. We'll talk again real soon.